This is Seeds Podcast, bringing you tips, conversations, and information about applied behavior analysis.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Seed Podcast. This is yet another episode by Seed, and today we're very fortunate to have Datuk Dr Amar-Singh to join us today to speak all about inclusive education. Datuk Dr Amar-Singh is a veteran senior consultant pediatrician, who has recently retired from the civil service after 35 years of serving with MOH. And he's currently an advisor for the National Early Childhood Intervention Council, the NECIC, and also the advisor for the National Family Support Group for Children and People with Special Needs. I think Dr. Amar is an advocate for special needs children, families, and communities, and he also advocates very greatly for the disadvantaged, indigenous, and marginalized children. Hi, Dr. Amar. Would you like to welcome to the podcast, and you can introduce yourself more?
Hi. Good to see both of you here, Alexa and Sien, and thank you for inviting me, and especially for choosing such an important topic. I think inclusion is the heart of everything, and I'm delighted to be here. Yeah, as you said, so say something about myself. Well, I'm dyslexic. That perhaps goes some distance, and struggled through my early childhood. Fortunately, there were some teachers who rescued me. My father's a teacher, so he trained many of these teachers, so they had sort of like some allegiance to support me. At that time, dyslexia was not even a known word in people's vocabulary. And so I struggled through childhood, and thank God for multiple choice. And when computers came along, they helped me quite a bit. So as a pediatrician, I've worked extensively with people with disability and started quite a large number of support groups and NGOs with a view for us to change the system. And I believe changing the system always starts with changing the individual, which is ourselves first, and then the people around us and supporting others. Yeah, I'll say a little bit more when we share slides. Okay.
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Amar, for your story. And without further ado, we'll jump right into the topic of the day. And we will start with the question, and I think perhaps that's the biggest question and the most fundamental question for today. What exactly is inclusive education? What are some of the common myths and beliefs about inclusive education, and especially in Malaysia? So, Dr. Amar, you can take it away.
Thanks, Alexa. Let me share some slides right now with everyone. Okay, I'm sharing. Can you see the slides?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, good. Yeah, so I wrote this paper recently for APAC, Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation, which outlines all the issues for disability, for education and inclusion. I recommend you. I've also got a number of other documents for you which are available besides the full APAC paper. We did a study with other parents about what's the inclusion status in Malaysia right now. And then we wrote an advocacy document, a rights document on how you can get your children into school. There's also MOE quick facts, and this lovely document by Hannah summarizing the whole evidence of it. And I also shared a disability overview document that may be useful for some parents. Okay. So you've asked this question, what is inclusive education? What are some of the common myths and beliefs? So let me talk about inclusive education first. I wrote this for the NECIC Council and Conference in 2016. So let me read it out to you. Inclusion is the heart of all humanity. We all want to be accepted for who we are. I think that's a basic tenet for all of us. Unfortunately, many people in society are in the habit of creating barriers and walls to exclude others based on their gender, ethnicity, religion, social status, or abilities. And we see this constantly in our lives. So in Malaysia, while we appear to subscribe to the concept of inclusion in the principle, the reality on the ground appears to be challenging, and many parents and children with special needs face difficulty obtaining full inclusion. So I want to say the inclusion is a heart. It's not just for children with special needs in education, it's true for every individual. And I'm showing a diagram right now in case some of you are on a podcast without the view. And this diagram is talking about what inclusion means. And there are 4 words here: exclusion, segregation, integration, and inclusion. And exclusion, I think we all understand. We're not allowed to come in, so you can't go to school. That's exclusion. Segregation is when you put a child in a special school. They're not in the same school with other children. And this used to happen and still happens for some children with deafness or blindness. And that's integration, which is the common practice in Malaysia, where there is a special class in a normal school, the PPKI class or special education class. They're within the school compound of the so-called normal school, but they're actually not really integrated. They don't really play with other children. They don't study with other children. And finally, is inclusion, where you're in the mainstream class, in the Aliran Perdana class. But inclusion is not just putting you in the class. Inclusion implies that you are supported and that you are accepted. So you're not just mainstreamed, but that you're supported and accepted. So I'd like to say inclusion is not about the child with a disability fitting in and meeting mainstream education targets, but inclusion is about the system adapting to include her or him. So it's about system change, not about child change as much, which is quite often what people think about. There are many myths, and I have summarized a couple of them in these few tables. I've got 6 of them to summarize. The first myth that's very common and held by not just the education department, but also by a lot of parents, which is that inclusion harms the quality of education for the typically able students. And so many parents without special needs don't really want special needs kids in their class with their children. But if you look at the evidence that's been available in the world, you have a special needs class student in your class, immediately the academic output of everybody improves, children with and without disability. And also the social and emotional development also improves. The second one is that children with disabilities can't keep up. I think that what we're aiming for any child, including the child with disabilities, is not to keep up, but to keep learning. And that's a very different mindset, a whole change in the way we look at it. And the way we do this is by flexible education systems and by universal design. Let me come to the third one to explain universal design to you. The third myth is that individualized expectation for a child with disability isn't fair. But actually, universal design for learning is the best way to teach all children. And so every child should be taught individually. I don't think we are cookie cutter kind of individuals. We can't all learn in the same way, but that's how schools are run. They run almost like factories. They expect everyone to respond or behave in the same way. But if you have a universal design for learning, then you recognize that everybody learns differently. Some people are better visually, some better with written, some better auditory. So we teach children according to the way they learn, not according to the way we want to teach them. The fourth myth is that they can be disruptive in the mainstream classroom. I think all children can be distracted and disruptive. I'm sure I was disruptive when I was very young. I was quite bright and I knew quite a bit before I came to school. And so school was extremely boring. And I think teachers had me as a handful. So I think when you see a child who's being a little bit disruptive or distracted, it's an opportunity to modify the classroom environment so that everybody can learn better. Fifth myth is that teachers are not trained to deal with children with disabilities, so they won't get the support. I believe that any quality education requires a teacher to be trained. I'm not sure that our typically able children are also receiving the quality education they should receive. So I would argue that teacher quality needs to go up. Education quality for teachers need to go up. And if we introduce special needs children in mainstream and include them, the whole quality of teaching actually can go up for everyone. Finally, some people argue inclusion expensive. No, the data suggests the other way, that if you include them, actually you bring the cost down. So these are some of the myths that I think are not reliable. Yes, carry on, Alexa.
Thank you, Dr. Amar. So it does sound like, can I just, it just sounds like it's a spectrum. So when you're talking about universal learning design, it includes even typical developing children, because even they have different learning styles, and we should, the line is very blurred. We should not just segregate special needs, typical, this is how typical kids learn, and this is how special needs kids learned. Is that right? I
agree. I think universal design for learning tries to have a very inclusive outlook. I had a maths teacher in my upper secondary who practiced this without knowing that she was practicing this. And, you know, she would teach us by the fact that the person who knew how to do the maths problem came up to the front of the class and teach everybody in the class. And each of us taught in a different style and kind of met everybody's need in the classroom. And she often broke it up into groups so that we could support each other. So universal design for learning can look very different in different classes. And perhaps one of the best examples, of course, is Finland, that is practicing this extensively. And it targets every child. So it improves every child.
Right. Okay, so the next question, Dr. Amar, is there a difference between inclusive education and a mainstream education, or are they the same kind of, thing?
Yeah. Alexa, that's a very smart question. I think very few people ask this question. Most people believe that when you mainstream a child, then automatically it is inclusive education, but it's not the same. I've compared them in a two table here, ideal inclusion and the common practice in Malaysia, mainstreaming. So let's talk about common practice right now. If you are mainstream, that means your special needs in an aliran perdana mainstream class, you're expected to demonstrate a certain set of abilities. You are expected to keep up with the existing curriculum. You don't really have any interaction with your peers unless you can build a bridge or they build a bridge with you. And you're actually looked on as the kind of the needy, dependent kind of child. But in inclusion, you actually participate in the classroom with individualized support. There could be a teacher aide or other support that's coming to you. You are able to access the curriculum with accommodation and modifications. The student is engaged and interacting with the peers. The peers are trained about the child's needs and are encouraged to interact with them. And finally, you are a valued member, a respected member in the classroom. So that's real inclusion, not just dumping a special needs class in the mainstream. I think it must be an environment that's conducive to learn, not just for the special needs child, but for everybody. And learning at your own pace is very important. And as I mentioned earlier, continue learning. And you're not just learning academically, but you're gaining social skills and life skills. One of the greatest things I learned in school was how to get on with other people and how to interact. And any children, I like to come back to this idea that we don't just provide assistance to the special needs child, but any child who needs it obtains extra assistance. And ideally, every child, disabled or otherwise, had an individualized education plan, which should be part of inclusion for them. So we're talking about educational equity, as some of these individuals have talked about, and it's providing equal opportunities for learning for every learner. And that's what we're going at. Yes, Alexa.
Okay. This question actually came from Sien. Sien, do you have any clarification about this? Because we had some, Sien, I think your mic is mute.
Okay. I'm just taking everything in right now. So I might have more questions, but I'm, just taking everything in and trying to really pay attention to coming up questions. So I'll probably have more later on. But yeah.
And I think this question also came from, I think, some of the myth as well on how we view inclusive education and mainstream education. Is that right?
Yeah. So I think let's move away from thinking of inclusion primarily for the special needs child. Let's think about it for all children. Let's say that we don't want to just put children in the classroom and then they are receptive. Let's be crude. You vomit on them, they take it all in, they vomit back out for the exam. Right. That's not what we're looking at. We're looking at children learning and growing and developing and learning, especially the ability how to learn, which is a very difficult thing to teach. And so everybody in the classroom becomes a learner. Everybody in the classroom receives support according to their need.
Yeah, I actually have a very different math teacher, Dr. Amar, when I was in high school. Okay, I remember, and this has always stayed with me throughout, my life. That experience. So, it's at math class, and I'm really bad with math. But I always think now, looking back, that it's not that I'm bad, but it could be I wasn't taught the way I needed to be taught. So I remember, asking for help. And then so the teacher showed it to me again on the blackboard, and then I still didn't get it. She asked me to go in front to the room, and she showed it to me again the same way on the blackboard, and I still didn't get it. And then, of course, my mom said, you need to go for tuition. So I went for tuition, and they showed me the same way, and I didn't get it. So I thought, that problem must be with me. Why is it that the teacher showed me so many times across 2-3 different teachers, and still I did not get it? So my whole life, I thought I was just really bad at math, right? But, I don't, of course, I don't believe that anymore now. I just think that if I was taught differently. But I can just see, how that could affect a student's perception of what he or she is good at and how that could have an impact throughout their life.
Yeah.
So, when you mentioned, about your math teacher, that memory kind of like, come up, and then like, I'm going through this, like, oh, I'm really bad in math, and it's still there. It's still there. I still have this, like, I'm not good at math, every time. And then I'll just have to remind myself that's not true.
I believe that as a teacher, I will say something at the end about the role of education and the meaning of education, but I believe our role as a teacher is to actually facilitate learning, not to just deliver information. And that means understanding our children. I believe the same thing is also for us as parents. We need to understand each of our children is different. They receive love and they receive nurturing differently. And our role is to discover that and enable them to blossom.
Right. Sorry, Alexa, can I just real quick? So the other thing that came up under the myth and reality, one of the things that Dr. Amar, you mentioned is, student is engaged and interacting with peers. So teaching the rest of the students, on how to, how to have meaningful interaction with peers. And so recently, one of my friends had tagged me on Facebook, in this particular kind of poster saying that, instead of teaching our kids how to interact with others, why don't we teach everyone else how to interact with our kid? And so then she put there, Sien, maybe you can teach us how to do that. But I thought about that question and I'm like, I don't know if I know how to, because, what I think about the kid is what I see and what I observe. And I'm just, want to take this opportunity to ask Dr. Amar, how do we go about doing that? Or maybe you're going to address that later. Or are we really the best person, the best people to teach, the rest of the, for my lack of better word, neurotypical developing children, how to interact with, this kid? Or how can we go about doing it in a way that we actually consider this particular student that's in the classroom versus our perception of what they need and how we should teach the peers. So that's, I think, one of the things that I've been in my mind lately because of, being tagged in a Facebook picture.
I agree with you that terms are very difficult. I dislike all terms. I even dislike the word normal because I'm not sure who is normal. All of us are so different.
Right.
I believe the best person to do this is a teacher because she knows the kids. I've been invited, fortunately, by many schools to come and do this. When we've sent a special needs child to their class and they're struggling a bit, they've often invited us to come over. And what I do is I often talk to the class without the special needs child inside first. And I talk about how we are all different. And I talk about how this person is different and what the differences are so that we know how to relate to each other. But if I were a teacher in that class, I would also know all my different children in the class and their different idiosyncrasies and their quirks, and I would point out how each of us is so different and how some are quieter and some are more boisterous and and so on, and talk about we should celebrate these differences rather than segregate because of the differences. So so I've gone and done that, and I've done that as a pediatrician, helping people understand a person with a disability. But as a teacher, we could actually help people understand each other's personalities, which would be wonderful. The behavior I would like to see is supporting each other. That means everyone in the class works to support each other. There's no longer a desperate need to race to become first or academically more advanced, but people support each other in the class, which could simple thing as helping somebody write down homework so that mom at home or dad at home could see it, or helping someone during recess or toilet break, or choosing to sit with them because you want to be supportive of them. So if I could see this kind of spirit in the class, I think we've come a long way. And that's what usually has happened when I've gone to a school which has been supportive, and once they've understood the child, each person has been given a sort of a task that they have taken on board themselves as students and supporting each other. But I like to say that the way to go about it is not easy, and sometimes you run a behavior workshop for teachers and other individuals so that they can understand behavior and know how to support difficult behaviors.
Thank you.
All right. I think the next question, going back to a group mainstream education question is, again, is mainstream education the end goal for all learners with special needs, Dr. Amar? So,
yeah, this is something that a lot of education people, argue about, that, special needs need special areas and so on. It's a big, conflict. But let me show first some data from Western Europe. And you can see that from the shading that some of them only achieved about 25% of inclusion, but some of them have gone up to 75+% of inclusion. And Finland's the best example. More than 95% of all special needs are in mainstream. And when they mean mainstream, they mean inclusion, not just mainstream.
okay.
And if you look at the total children in Finland that are receiving support, 12% are receiving some form of general support. Another 10% get intensified support. Another 8% get specialized target support. So that's 30% of all children getting support. And not all of the children are children with disabilities. Some could be children coming from difficult home backgrounds, or some children with their own emotional, psychological issues as well. But that tells you the volume of support that they are providing in the class. So you can see that from Finland, their target is obviously aimed at close to 100%, to answer your question from them. But what's happening in Malaysia? Here's what happens when children go to school in Malaysia. This is looking at the average enrollment into Ministry of Education schools. And I must say that 30% of children today don't go to MOE schools. So this figure is a slightly older figure, but today this would probably be closer to like 410 or 420,000. So of the children that go in, 40% have problems in reading, writing at school entry at Standard 1. So obviously a lot of children are not ready for the Standard 1 environment, because there's a test nowadays and teachers know where they perform. After giving them 3 months of support, 10% of all children are still struggling with basic reading and writing capabilities. So we have a very large proportion of children who need the kind of support that Finland is giving to children, even in the mainstream children situation. So I'd like to describe 3 groups of children, 3+1 actually. There's a 4th group emerging, of children who come to our schools and where they should be placed in line to your question. And if you're not school ready, I must say that you're going to have difficulty and the gap is going to widen. So the first group is the large proportion of children. They've had kindergarten, they have no major disability, there are no barriers to learning, and they receive most of the education resources that we give them in our country. This is the average kid. Then the second group of children are the ones with a major disability, a very severe one. Maybe a child with cerebral palsy that's quite severe, or severe autism, Down syndrome, or child with significant intellectual disability, or blind, and perhaps deafness without a cochlear implant. These are children who require special education. And in Finland, 2% of all the children, or slightly less than 2%, are in special facilities. These are the children, many of them are in special education classes, some of them are in special schools. I'm not a purist. I believe until we can go up, change the whole inclusion environment, these children may be better served currently in a special education environment. And I would prefer that to be a special class in a normal school rather than a purpose-built school, because I think there's still some degree of interaction with, educationally typical children for them. But these are the children that I'm worried about. Another 10-15% who've got some disability or some learning disorder, but they're actually reasonably functioning, or some people call them high functioning. So it could be a child with ADHD, a child with high functioning autism. I've even had children with high functioning Down syndrome. I have 5 children with Down syndrome that I've included in normal class, dyslexia and so on. These are children that I think we should fight for inclusion. They're not suitable to put into a special needs class. They can be in mainstream with support. And these are the ones that I think we are failing right now in our country. These are the ones that we are strongly advocating for. Okay, there's a 4th group, as I said, emerging. There are lots of children struggling with language issues, come from different backgrounds, some from poor social backgrounds. But increasingly in my practice, I've seen children with environmental deprivation. And what I mean by that, excessive screen time. The children who spend 8, 10, 12 hours. The average time for a 2-year-old in Malaysia now on screens is 6 to 8 hours. That's the average time they spend on a screen, unsupervised screen. And so these are busy parents using a screen as a babysitter. And these children come to school very poor. Their reading and writing and speech abilities are a struggle. I now estimate 1 in 3 Malaysian children is in this state. And this is another huge challenge for the education department as well, not just this group. And of course, if these groups are given a screen, then you worsen their situation as well. Okay, so I think that, as I said, I'm not a purist. I think some children should be in special ed, but a lot of children can be included. And later, once we get this group settled, let's come back to this group and also consider including some of them as well.
Right. And so how do we determine if a learner with special needs is benefiting? So there's the third group, right? That's the group where we're most concerned about. How do we, I guess, before we started this podcast, we touched a little bit on this. How do we make sure that when we place these learners into inclusive classroom, they are actually growing, they are benefiting from their learning environment?
I think this has been your most difficult question for me, Alexa. I think it's better answered by Sien or somebody else with a special education background. But I would say these are the ways, this is how I look at it. It's an ongoing assessment, of course, but I would like to do 3 different groups of assessments. I would like to do formal assessments. I like to do informal assessments, observations which are teacher and parent, both of them, and if possible, a self-assessment by the student. Now, some educational systems in the world don't believe in 2 or 3, they only believe in number 1. I don't agree with that. I believe the informal assessments by teacher and parent are as good as the formal assessments and important, and self-assessment as student ultimately is a very important one. So how would we do that? I believe everyone should have an individual education plan. We should do frequent ongoing assessments, not just one every term or end of the year. That's too late. We should do curriculum-based measurements, which are now called student progress monitoring. And we should have some performance criterion. I do think we need that. We benchmark that for the individual child. It's not benchmarked for the class. In addition to that, maybe some standardized achievement tests for the whole class are necessary. Not so much to tell you that, oh, you are position 30 or something in the class, but to see, where this child is, to see what more we can do for them. Then I think a behavior observation checklist is useful. That's useful for not all children, but for the ones that are struggling with behavior. Informal observations, as I said, we need parents and teachers to both do independently and then come back and exchange notes and discuss it. We also should look at social integration and bullying. If possible, do assessments for these. And sometimes these assessments may come from other children in the class. And I think for me, whenever I've run a department, I've always had ground assessments done by everybody, especially of me. I get all my staff to assess me all the time because that's the only way I see myself from their perspective. And I like that for the classroom as a whole. I wish students could assess their teachers. That would be wonderful as well. And finally, some self-assessment by the child. If the child is able to do this and to give feedback, because we may not be meeting their needs, we are meeting our perceived needs of them.
Right.
So those are some of my ideas. I like to supplement this by describing 4 children, good and bad. Okay, here's the first one. He's an 11-year-old boy with autism. And this is when I saw him much younger. And I always believe that, assessing that IQ better than mine, despite his autism, and a lot of children with autism have very high IQs. And he can score about 70-80% on tests. The reason he doesn't score very well is because he needs a bit of support. He sometimes only do a few pages, or he does the front page and you could tell him, turn over and do the next page of the test, or he might forget to do it. And he's got some speech and social problems. But the teacher keeps sending him back to me. And every year they send him back to me and say he's inattentive in class because he doesn't look at the teacher or other people. He's always looking outside, but he's listening. So he's caned very often for his inattention. But if you look at his standardized assessment, he's 90 out of 150 in the whole standard. He's pretty decent. Actually, I think he should be first if we gave him enough support. And so every year there are letters saying, please keep him in class. He doesn't qualify for disability registration. He should not go to special needs. After doing this for 4 or 5 years, I got so fed up. I wrote a letter saying, please send me all the children below him, the 60 who are below him. I will fill a disability registration for every single one of them. Only then will I fill it for him. Only after that, the school stopped disturbing me about him. But it shows you, after so much advocacy, that's, and seeing his performance, which is better than, an average performance at least, is not enough for the teachers. They're still looking at his behavior only, not his academic performance. But here's a different one. Another child with autism, with some social impairment. We decided with parents, we're not going to tell the school, we just put him in, which is quite often our modus operandi, because the moment we say autism, schools reject. And, after some time, the HM found out and he called the parents and me. And surprisingly, he was very supportive. He gave responsibility to everybody. He talked to the whole class, asked me to come, and we supported the school. Excellent outcomes. Everybody knows the child's got autism, but everybody supports. Nobody thinks this particular girl is very different from anybody else. Here's another negative example. It's an 80-year-old chap who came to me when he's 8 because he's doing poorly in reading and writing, is dyslexic. But he was viewed as stupid and lazy, and the teachers wanted a special registration to move him to special ed and refused to even allow a shadow aide to come to the school. So again, they don't look at him as a whole, as a child. They don't look at his abilities, but they look immediately at his disability only. And that's a weakness of any assessment. We want to look at your strengths, not just your weaknesses. And he's verbally very good. His intellectual ability is good. All you got to do is give him some support and he would catch up. Here's a positive example. I had a child who we placed with hyperactivity and some learning disorders in normal standard 1. And he ran out of class 17 times a day. It was spectacular. But the teacher was very positive. Call parents and say, hey, I'd like to do something about this child. Can you please wait at the gate so he doesn't run out? Otherwise, I'm fine. It took a few weeks for it to settle, and he did very well. He got a lot of support from the teacher in the class, and he moved on well to standard 2. So you can see that, we can look at the child and say he's a failure, or look at the child and say, yeah, there's a challenge here and we're going to do something. So whatever assessment you must do is not to negatively brand this child, but to look at the possibilities in the child and see how we can blossom them.
Right. Thanks. Dr. Amar, it's you mentioned about the bullying assessment. That's a assessment.
Yep. Yeah, very difficult to do. I believe a lot of that is, if you want, for example, in the medical field to know about doctors being bullied by other doctors, the only way is to do an anonymous survey of the doctors on the ground. So the only way to do a proper bullying assessment is to do an anonymous survey of other class students. Maybe give them a Google form link, allow them to bring their device, and then everybody fill it up. And then you get a good idea. By the way, all the assessments of me by my staff have always been anonymous as well. So staff are free to say what they want here.
Yeah. So a follow-up question for this area, right? What is the current, I guess, support, or like how much of this is being done in
MOE or in private or in Grow Home School? I do not know. Even though there is supposed to be an IEP for every child with disability, we know it's not happening. Yeah. Because parents have no access to it. By right, MOE says parents should be able to access the IEP, and I'll give you a link later where to access it. Okay. I don't see this being shared with parents. All they see is a standardized achievement test, which is benchmarked with other students. So some of them is being done. Occasionally, teachers do fill a checklist and send to me, but mainly they do it as a means to actually exit the child from their class to special needs. That's the only checklist I actually see for them. And even then, when I assess the child, I believe that that checklist is biased and not looking at both the child's perspective and the parent's perspective.
And I wanted to just now I saw the social integration and bullying assessment, right? And it kind of just reminded me of I guess another question that I had for you, Dr. Amar. So with the current environment and the current state that we are now, I know it takes time for inclusive to really happen, and there's this it's a very big idea. So to put a special needs, our children in this environment, in this current environment, where I would say, can I just briefly say that we're not exactly ready? Peers, there's a long way to go to educate the parents on the other side, parents of typical children, teachers. Is it worth, I guess the question is, putting this children, we're not talking about just academic, we're not talking about just we're putting them in school because they are at age to go to school, right? What about, bullies, psychological stress that, how do we balance that, and how do we, assess that? and make sure that they are protected, you know?
Very tough. I'm not sure how to answer you. I've dealt with lots of children who have either at school problems, not with disability per se, who've come to me and we've assessed and we've identified that bullying is a problem. The bullying may not just be by students, may also be by a teacher. It may be unintentional. Teacher has good intentions. Let me give you an example. I was in a Chinese school, and this boy didn't do his homework, so teacher took the book and threw it across the classroom at him and said, "I don't want to see your homework anymore because you're useless." So he was petrified, you know, after that. So I offered him to change his class or change his school. He said, "No, I can't. If I go to any other school, they also think I'm a troublemaker. That's why I'm coming there." So he just, you know, he was smart enough to, and it was his standard 3. He was smart enough to just stomach it out, you know, so much street wiseness in him. And I learned over the years that many children don't want to change class for that reason, because if you change class, you're often considered a problem child. Going and speaking to the school by parents has mixed responses. Sometimes headmasters listen, sometimes they don't. I prefer working with individual teachers if you can, so we don't overstep them. And I tell parents to try and support the teachers, because it's extremely difficult to be a teacher. I like to say that right now. To teach a classroom of 30 or 40 is a nightmare. I don't envy a teacher. By the way, I was planning to be a teacher. I just happened to be a doctor. You know, when I fill up my choices for university, medical was only one, the rest was all teaching. And I just happened to get the top one. So I think teaching is a very challenging field, and teachers get bashed quite a bit. I'm not here for teacher bashing, but there are teachers who can be quite strict with children. And of course, your peers can bully you. So not easy to handle. Quite often children just tolerate it rather than overcome the situation.
Okay. Thanks, Amar. Thanks for the input. Yeah, so I think the next question is, what is the benefit of inclusive education to families with special needs, to the greater community? So how do they benefit from inclusive education?
Yeah, this is poorly known to the Malaysian society. Those of us who are in the field know it very well. I wish all parents in the country knew this, and especially, you know, people in the education field as well. And again, I refer you to, I'm not sure how to pronounce his name, Henhai or Hen, it's probably a Scandinavian name. And he and his colleagues have summarized all the evidence, and it's a large document and worth going and reading. And one of the benefits is that all children improve. Once you have a special needs child included in your class, you have short and long-term cognitive and social development benefits. What does that mean? The academic output of everybody improves, and friendships and caring relationships improve. And this spills over into your own family. Let me give you a lateral example right now. Many people employ maids. If you treat your maid poorly, let me give you a prophecy. When you're old, your child has probably put you in an old folks' home and treat you the way you treat your maid. We are teaching humanity to our children the way we treat our maid. If we treat our maid like part of the family, the child learns this very well and then treats everybody the same way. So having a special needs child in the classroom teaches you how to deal with people who are different and accept them, and you develop meaningful friendships. You understand that the crux of all of life is to develop good relationships, not to pursue money and other things in life. So you foster acceptance and you foster diversity. There's also good evidence that if you push inclusion all the way up to high school, university, and workplaces, then you actually significantly improve national economic gains. So it is in the interest of countries who want to improve their gross domestic product, the GDP, to actually do inclusion, because your country's wealth actually goes up. And there's a spillover to the entire society. We become more inclusive as a whole society. Because once you accept a person with disability, you accept a person who's a different ethnic group, a different religion, a different outlook in life. It spills over, and so I think these are the major benefits.
I see. So really, it's a shift of mindset to include people of different kinds.
And Alexa, can I change that word? I've been trying to change that word even in my own vocabulary. It's a shift of heart sets. It's not the mind that so much we need to change. It's a heart, the core of our being. I don't mean emotions, I mean the spirit, the center of your being. There you are changed. When your heart set is changed, then your outlook in life is very changed. The mind is quite fickle. It can rationalize many things, but the heart is where we connect with other people, where we believe, where we love, where we hope and we dream. And that's the place that needs to change.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thanks, Amar. Okay, so next question, we'll talk about, again, going back to the education system, and I think we touched a little bit about that. At the current state that we are in now, it's kind of like a chicken and egg situation. Some kids are almost ready, but I think, or maybe Dr. Amar, you can chip in a little bit where our education system is at now in terms of whether or not we're inclusive ready. How do we, go about this problem? The children is almost ready, education system not really, because we are all in this process, right? We're still, it's not an end goal. We haven't reached where we would like to see inclusive education to happen yet.
I believe all of us are on a learning curve and a journey. Like maybe a journey is a better word than learning curve. And we are changing. If I take medicine as an example, in the 1950s and 60s, parents were not allowed to stay with their children in hospital, even in industrialized countries. Can you imagine dropping off a 3-year-old who's sick in hospital and you got to go home, you can't stay? I mean, it was barbaric, but that's time it was thought that was good medicine. Today, of course, we would never accept a child being left in hospital without parents being around them. So I believe the education department is making progress, and I've seen in my own lifetime that we're making some progress. We've been moving forward. And so sometimes I think it's both ways. Sometimes the child is ready, the system is not. Sometimes the system is ready, the child is not. And we've got to look at both of these systems. Let me summarize the reality right now. We've done lots of work, look at a lot of data, and this is the 3 20s I'd like to share with you for our current MOE achievements. Only 20% of special needs children are in full inclusion right now. MOE quotes 40–50%, but MOE only knows a fraction of the children who are special needs. So the vast majority of special needs are unknown to them. Less than 20%, the second 20%, less than 20% of all special needs are identified right now by MOE, which is a crisis. And we are probably about 20 years behind regional nations. I'm not talking at the West, I'm talking about Taiwan or South Korea or Singapore. And at one point, Taiwan and South Korea were 40 years behind us in many things. And then in these last 30 years, they have actually caught up and moved far beyond us in terms of inclusion and special ed and many things. And the fact that they can do this means that we can also do this. And the education blueprint targets are down there for people to look. So these are the 3 20s I talk about our reality, the 3 things that we need to move forward with. And I show this graphic, and sometimes people get offended. I think MOE has seen this graphic on one of my slides and got offended. How do you know I have a learning disability? Maybe you have a teaching disability. And I often think about this myself. I have been evolving over the years as a doctor. I know that I have a deficit as a doctor. Medical school didn't prepare me on how to listen to people and how to communicate effectively, and I had to learn how to be a good doctor. And so quite often I think I had a doctor deficit, and not necessarily the patient had a medical disease, my problems with me. So I think we need to acknowledge this. We must be honest about this and say we need to grow and we need to move forward. So I'll share a couple of things which are in the APEC document. I shared that with APEC, and a lot of the member countries, or they call member economies there, including Australia, New Zealand, and our regional countries, were very appreciative of a document I shared with them, and ideas on how we can move forward. The first one is we must change the heart set of our country, of our community, and that requires first to work with media. Media is very influential. Of course, we got social media, which is powerful, but we still rely a lot on our media, which is often electronic. And we need to put more stories out there, stories that talk about journeys, not just stories of the disabled child making it, but also the stories of the able child having a person with disability in their classroom and how it impacted them. And we need to move away from all non-inclusive behaviors in every area. And gender is a messy area in our country we need to work on especially. The third thing in changing misconceptions is changing the teaching profession. Our teaching profession has got a very, very low perception right now. Nobody wants to be a teacher. Nobody wants to be a teacher or a nurse. These are two very low. Tak boleh buat apa-apa, jadi cikgu. I mean, it's kind of nonsense thing. Teaching is such a high level profession. That's why I put it as the 4 choices I had. I only happened to put medicine first because my dad probably wanted that. I don't mind being a doctor and helping. I just want to be in a profession to help other people. So teaching is a powerful profession and something that I'm still involved in teaching medical students. So change these perceptions are very important. Secondly, enhance all our education inclusion policies. The single one thing that we can do the country to transform special education will be this, to change the special education unit pendidikan khas to the inclusive education unit pendidikan inklusif. If we do this one single thing, the whole focus change. Now their focus is to run the the special education classes. If we do this, then suddenly their whole focus is how do I get a special needs child into mainstream and include them, offer them inclusive support. If we do this, it's fantastic. And of course, they need a budget to do this. Some of the KPIs and MOE need to be killed. We don't need KPIs for achievement. We need KPIs for inclusion. That will be changed to focus as well. The third thing is, we talked quite a bit about this for universal design for learning, and we need to incorporate this in every level of teaching for teachers in school, for university, at all levels. And we need this to be in-service training for teachers who are already in the system because they can't go back. For NECIC, the National Early Childhood Intervention Council, we develop a course for preschool period for this, for kindergarten teachers and other people, TASCAs who want to make it happen. We've got a formal certified course that you can attend for this. Fourthly, we should promote short-term measures. The two short-term measures we can do immediately to make inclusion happen is use under-enrollment mainstream schools. 34% of our mainstream primary schools have less than 150 students, per standard. So these are the ones that we could quickly use. The second thing is run a national shadow aid program. Now, we don't have the manpower or the money to do this, but at least support parents who say, yes, we are welcome to you have this. Right now is Budi Bicara HM. It's there, but it's up to the HM and many don't like. Many teachers don't like to have a shadow aid inside the class watching them teach. For me as a specialist, I've always had trainees watching me teach, watching me work. And I find that a strength because sometimes they point out things that I miss. So I find that a strength, not a weakness. So this is low-hanging fruit that we can grab. But there are long-term solutions we must put in. Besides well-trained teachers who know universal design for learning, we must boost resource personnel that Sien talked about earlier. We need psychologists and occupational therapists and educational psychologists, language therapists and special education teachers. All these people must come on board and support our teachers. Teachers cannot cut it alone. They need specialized help to come and help particular children with behavior and so on. And one of the primary things we need to do across the board, not just for special needs, for everybody, is cut our class size down. We should go away from 2 sessions in a school. We should move to 1 session, perhaps a little bit longer, and reduce the class size down to about 20 so that learning can be done better in school and teacher can cope as well better, which means a lot more teachers. We need a lot more quality teachers there. We need to make classrooms, number 6, more welcoming, to embrace them. We say, yeah, so if someone with disability comes and the teacher doesn't say, no, we don't want you, we can't teach you. No, we want you. We especially want you because we know the benefits you're going to give to our class. And to do this, we need to change attitudes of children without disabilities as well as their parents. And for that to happen, realization, as we talked in the beginning, about the benefits of inclusion system must come to everyone. We need to work in partnership with parents. This is still very poor. I know we have parent-teacher associations, but I wish there's more sharing between teachers and parents. Parents have much to offer. Sometimes there are a lot of skill sets. If I'm a parent of a child with autism or another disability, let's say Down syndrome or dyslexia, I've brought up my child for the last 5 to 7 years. I've known the disability. I've worked with them. Often I've got a lot of skills and I actually can offer them to the teacher. Quite often I can actually be the parent, the teacher aide in the class to support teacher and offer them ideas. So I would like to see transparency in individual education plans. And that's the link the MOE has, which parents can go to and look at the special education plan that should be available for every special needs child. Whether it's happening, only parents can see because we're not allowed access to that site. Number 8, besides universal design for learning, there's also universal design for physical structures. And we should build every building like this, every home, every office, every public building, and of course, every school. This means accessibility to everybody. So the disabled are not just people with learning or intellectual problems, autism. They're also people in wheelchairs and with physical disabilities, and we need to be barrier-free classrooms. So for older schools, we need to renovate. I'm not a purist. I'm a realist, and you can't renovate every school. So we should target in each city a couple of schools, in each small town, a couple of schools who will be given money to renovate. So children with physical disability can gravitate towards these schools. Yeah? We need to mandate in legislation this to happen. Otherwise, architects never even learn about this, and contractors don't do this. So this should be mandated legislation.
Right, right.
So those are quite heavy duty, some of those. Some of those can be done quickly. Some require long-term initiatives.
Yeah, yeah. But
by turning our country around, yes.
Yes. Those are, and we need to continue on this journey to make inclusion education happen, and so that all the kids can be included. And what we want to see is eventually a change in the whole community when everyone benefit from inclusive education, right?
And don't forget, all of us are going to become disabled. We're all going to become old.
Right.
And when you're old, you become a bit more clumsy. Someday you're going to have difficulty walking. So the things I'm suggesting about inclusion, about changing society, about barrier-free, all work also for many of us who will have a disability later in life. Yeah.
I was interviewing another guest for this podcast, and she also spoke about changing the physical structure, because she saw a documentary about they interviewed a person on a wheelchair, and he was saying that he couldn't even reach when he goes for shopping. He's able, like he can, move around his wheelchair, but when he goes for grocery shopping, he couldn't reach things on the shelves.
Yeah, my wife and I, a couple of years ago, because we passed 60, 55 plus, we renovated our home to make it friendly for an older person. So all our cupboards are down the ground floor. You don't have to climb up to get anything anymore.
Yeah.
We change our flooring a little bit. Everything, you gotta think about things that make it meaningful for you. Yes.
Right. And eventually all of us will get there.
Yes.
Yeah. So, Dr. Amar, the next question is for the parents. So sometimes Sien and I, we consult parents, and I sometimes hear parents say that I don't want to risk it. I don't think the schools are ready. I don't feel confident. I don't want to put them through it, and they stress. I will get stressed, and everybody, is just going to end up. So what do you have to say to them? Can you give some advice to the parents out there? What are some things that they can do while they put their children through mainstream or schools that claim that they're doing inclusive education, and learning the ropes on how to, do inclusive education?
Alexa, one of the problems with me is I'm not just honest, I'm frank. It means I don't speak the truth. I also speak all the truth. So I'm going to say something that's going to be a bit messy right now. If I had a child today, they won't go to school. They'll be at home with me. I won't send them to a homeschool, because homeschools are just alternative schools, really. True homeschooling is you teach your child at home. So if I had a child today, one of me, either my wife or me, would give up our job, or we might alternate, and one of us would become the primary teacher, the other one would become a secondary teacher, and we will teach our child. And we look for other opportunities for social interaction and stuff like that, because I want to give my child a phenomenal education, and they're not going to get that, not even in private schools generally. So that's saying something very dramatic, and I'm not advocating that for most parents, because it's difficult to do this. It's extremely difficult. If you don't have the resources, if you need to earn money for your kids, then it's difficult, and both parents have to work. So let's talk more practically. This document I've shared this document with you, and if parents want, they have access to it. This is a study that we did with more than 400 parents who responded, looking at what is the status of inclusive education right now in schools. And remember that when we did the study, we only asked people who tried. We didn't ask people who didn't try. So it's a subset. A lot of people didn't even try at all. And of those who tried, only 40% were successful. Another 20% of passed successful. And sadly, Ministry of Education schools were the worst. The best were international and home schools. Some private schools not too bad as well. Okay. And secondly, the least supportive schools were MOE. The most supportive schools were homeschool and private schools as well. So this tells you what's happening out there right now. Not everybody is going to make it. The majority are not going to make it. These are parents who are committed to trying for inclusion and don't expect even 50% support from some of the schools out there. And what are the enabling factors from this study? One teacher made it. We heard it so many times. One HM, one person, one class, one school allowed it. Other children accepted my child. So quite often it's a personal. And I've always felt this: systems don't work, people do. That's been one of my slogans in life. People make it happen, not systems. I'm never enamored. People have always asked me to join this organization or that, or join politics and all that. I'm not enamored with those systems. I think working on the ground with individuals is where the change is going to happen. And that's what this study also showed to us. What are the hindering factors? Again, the individual. One teacher's attitude was very negative. Even though he scored in a few subjects, teacher's attitude was very negative. Very hard to find a school that's going to accept my child. The once that they know your child is OKU, it's a very demeaning, label. I dislike this label myself as well. I don't know what label we're going to use. Just use different, maybe. Maybe use no label at all. We're just so different. So, stigmatization. So how do we make it happen? I believe you need to know your rights. We need to harness parent empowerment. And this was number 9 on my APAC document, but I wanted to share it here. And I've shared this detailed advisory with you. There's an FAQ, frequent advice, ask questions, written by this national support group that we started recently. Elvin, who's a parent of a child with blindness, who has been included in mainstream school throughout his life. He's blind, but it's inclusion. Father fought for this all throughout. Elvin, of course, made it happen as well. Shaila, who's a special education teacher who's got a child with autism, and she's a strong parent advocate, and she made her child inclusion. And then, of course, there's me. And we wrote this to give you ideas what to do, what your rights are. And if you go through the document, it goes through step by step. For example, parents, a school refused to accept your child into their school. What can you do? We give you what section the code, which act the code. And of course, there's a 0 reject policy. Nobody can reject. So all you got to do is quote this to them. If they still don't want to listen to you, then ask them for a written letter of rejection. Nobody will give this to you, because once you got that, you can send the education department. They're in trouble because they're going against the policy of the national policy. The national policy by Ministry of Education, Ministry and the Minister is to support inclusion. I have dialogued with the Minister and the Ministry of Education a couple of times, and they're very, very supportive of inclusive education. So if they still refuse, then there is a mechanism in the MOE to complain, but many people feel scared to complain in case their child's victimized. What you can do is actually contact us and we can try and advocate for you. Okay, so seldom you need to get to us. Asking for a written letter usually will go. So parents have the right which school your child goes to. That's MOE policy. Yeah? Okay, but on the ground, schools try to fudge this, and we just need to know our rights.
Yeah.
And the reason they fudge it is because they want their school to perform. They don't know, and they're scared they can't support your child. Some of it is good, some of it is bad. The second thing is, okay, they accept you to school. They don't want to allow you to include your child in mainstream. They don't want inclusion. So again, parents have the right to decide which class their child goes in, not just school, but the class as well. Again, this is quoted in the relevant document. So again, you can follow the similar system. And of course, for physical disability, shadow aid, and all that. So it goes through different scenarios, many scenarios. We were reading this. So here's my simplistic way. I think must learn from other parents. The moment you know your child's got special needs, the thing I spent a lot of my time and energy was forming parent support groups, because they're very powerful. They go beyond us. They learn faster than any doctor or therapist can teach them. So join a parent support group, learn from other parents. Don't be shy to say your child's got a disability. Second, get to know your rights. From the document that we wrote, and for others, get to know your rights. Thirdly, get your child ready for school. Here's where we depend a lot on therapists, on early intervention programs, on inclusion-sensitive kindergartens, and we get ready the child for school. Fourthly, this sounds a bit negative, but education department not going to like this, but I'll say it anyway. We don't tell education department about hidden disabilities unless necessary. Sometimes I write a letter and say, this child is a bit different. He's a bit quiet, and his personality is a bit different, and he doesn't speak so much. Actually, he's got autism, but I didn't say all that. I just said he looks a bit different. But he's very smart, and in my assessments of him, his IQ is excellent, and he can do X, Y, Z. So we say that he's got some problem, but we also say he's got great abilities. And sometimes that's enough for the school. We don't talk. But quite often we place the school in mainstream. We know inclusion is not going to happen so well, but we try and support. Then I tell parents, do number 5, you work and support the teacher. When the teacher say, your child a bit different, a bit difficult. Oh, thank you very much for supporting my child. You send a thank you letter, give some kueh, you support other children in the class. I have one parent who gave a gift to all children who supported her son. And this kind of thing works because teachers don't get support. After the teacher shows interest in your child, you write a letter to HM and say, this teacher is spectacular. So thank you very much. Because the letter goes into their annual performance review and makes a difference for somebody in the civil service. You get more marks and that changes your, you might get a bonus, okay? And of course, if everything fails, I said, change environment. I want to homeschool international private school. I'm not going to stay in an environment which is not supporting my child, especially is victimizing my child. I wouldn't stay, but I would try very hard first, and preparing the ground and working with the teachers is an important thing to do. Okay. Yeah. So I like to say this is very important. You got to network with like-hearted people. So although you want to learn from family support groups, you also got to put your energy in. I always believe if you want a system to change for your child, you must help other people's children. When you do that, it changes for your child as well. So don't just learn from other people, but also network with them to change the system and fight. Fight don't mean physically, but fight, with the system, for the system to be, and the system is responsive to change if enough people actually willing to put it there. So ongoing advocacy. Remember, it takes time. You got to keep the focus on the child's needs, not on our needs, and it's persistence. You need persistence. You need memorandums, you need civil action, you need parliamentary debates, you need to know your MP and tell your MP, please bring this up for us. Some things we all do. Plus, of course, don't forget the media. And one of the problems we have is many parents are shy to let us tell their story in the media. If more parents came forward, I think this would be great.
Right. And parents are always the best advocate for their children.
Oh, definitely. Occasionally, what I've done is I've helped children write letters. Siblings have written letters to advocate for their siblings. And usually, of course, I've helped redraft the letter extensively, but I wanted their name without my name and saying, this is my brother, and Education Department, please listen. He's got a lot of good points. He has got some problems, but please help him. And those kind of letters go a long way. The media is very, very supportive of such letters, and quite often when you interview you and do a video of you, and and because they're interested in selling their media, and so you can use that in a good way as well.
Yeah. Thanks, Amar. And what are your thoughts about the private and public education sectors joining hands to bridge the gap to inclusive education? This is a very another messy question for you.
Correct. And I'm frank, so I will be frank. First of all, I'd like to say I've seen in my time, especially in this last 20 plus years, a rise in unhealthy profit-moting professionals, both therapists as well as people in the education service. And I don't support this. Right. I do not believe that health or education should be profit-driven. I believe everybody should get a decent wage, yes. But I think these things are basic human rights, and I do not believe that we should profit from them. But it's happening. I have people who do ABA therapy and charge $5,000 a month, but only see you one time in that month and write a program which you are supposed to execute, which I think is not acceptable. And so I want to say also on the flip side that homeschools, private schools, international schools are used extensively by children with special needs because they provide a more flexible and accepting environment. And one of my worries is this, that MOE is losing out. The children are gravitating to, we're now segregating them in a sense, and that's not good for children in mainstream. It's going to damage our education system. Also, I'd like to say that our services are urban and don't reach rural communities, indigenous communities, migrant refugees, and religious schools, all of which I feel very strongly about, and they need support for us to help them. So there are attempts by MOE. The Pemandu has a lab on public-private partnership, and it's part of the education blueprint. It's not focused especially on inclusion, but it's there. And, I'm not against it, but as long as it's not financial motive. So it should not burden the parents financially if we do this. It's useful for the private sector to bring expertise into the public sector. I wish we could exchange manpower. I've always wanted that for health, that, we can go and work in each other's sectors and learn from the expertise and the experience of each other. Ultimately, of course, as I said, education should be free, and we should be paid by alternative means. I believe that about health. I do not believe in private healthcare, full stop. I do not think that anybody should, when they are ill, should go to a doctor and then have to worry about how much to pay. And again, the funding mechanism, that should be external to that. I wish the same thing for education as well. But I do believe we should have public-private partnership, and it can enhance the system.
Right. Yeah. So I was also thinking about, because MOE, there are resources, lack of resources, and if private sector, they have such resources, perhaps something could, help each other out and, bridge those kids. Some kids, they receive private services before to get them school ready, but then parents, they, need to send them to MOE school, and then what happens then, between the transition period?
Alexa, definitely this is a transition period right now, and I would support it. For MOE, for example, they may buy services from the private sector to help public services. MOE could also consider that. But again, that charge should not go back to the parents. That's what I'm trying to say. It should go back to the system, and we pay taxes, and that's where good use of tax money would be.
Right. All right. Thanks, Dr. Amar. So, just now we also spoke a little bit about the benefits for the, what I would like to call the other side of the coin, which I think we shouldn't, for the lack of a better word, for the lack of a better phrase, because we're all on the spectrum. And how can we better persuade, or is there already some initiation? I mean, Dr. Amar, you are working on advocating all these, and are there already efforts initiated in these areas where we are starting to educate other parents with, for the lack of a better word, neurotypical kids, to accept our children in their environment, in the education environment? I'm very young in this field still, but I always have this incident stuck in my mind. So I used to be, my first year in special education, I used to be a school shadow. I shadowed this child, this little girl, in a typical classroom, and I just couldn't until today understand where this parent is coming from. So my child did not do anything to anyone. She's a quiet girl. She coloring by herself in the classroom. But that's one day her classmates' parent just stormed into the classroom and just told the teacher, "Do not let my child be near to this child." And I just, until today, could not. I wished I was brave enough to stand up and speak to the parents, but I know that wasn't my environment to control. So this event has just stuck with me until today. I think it's been 6 years, 7 years. So I do you have anything to?
Yeah, I think this is very deeply ingrained in our society. Some sort of, you get contaminated, or this person will damage you in some way, or affect you in some way. I had a very profound experience when I first started working with people with disability in 1978. I was very young, and I was working with institutions as well as in the university hospital setting with people who came for medical care. And I got to know and befriend a young girl who was in a wheelchair, a young adult girl who was in a wheelchair, and we got to talk quite a bit when she came for our therapy. And then one day I shared an apple with her, and she broke down and cried, because nobody's ever shared food with her entire life. Even in a house, they put the food aside for her and then they eat together. They never let her share the food with them, because somehow she would contaminate them. That's in her own family, not alone people outside. And I was surprised how a simple act of sharing an apple with her spoke volumes to her about, being, accepted, being included. So how to work with other parents? I'd like to show some data first. This is from the parent study, and it showed that, about 8% of them had experiences where other parents refused to support them. And, some of them in WhatsApp parent groups, class WhatsApp parent groups, complaining about their children, and of course, bullying as well, not addressed. I'm doing a study right now with 2 other colleagues looking at whether children are aware of their rights and their families as well. looking at the UN rights for children. And we created one of the situations we created using vignettes. And one of the situations is a physically disabled person in a wheelchair who's intellectually normal and can learn normally. And should she go to normal class is the question we ask. And here are the responses. We're just preliminary collecting data, but you can see 30% of people right now, both parents and children, say, no, they shouldn't go to normal class. So here's a person who can just learn just in a wheelchair only, but shouldn't go to normal class. And why? They give a whole host of reasons. Because they're different, because teachers should decide, because they disturb the class, because, you know, they need to be taught differently, you know, because might face bullying. So can you imagine children can think like this already? And they're young children that were interviewing Standard 4 and so on. So, and of course, their parents think that way as well. So definitely this is a prevalent mindset. Okay. How to win over the parents without special needs? I believe you need to win the local challenge in your own school. As I said earlier, we need to win the personal, and parent advocacy is very important. So as a parent, I would go and try and meet the other parent if it's possible and have a chat with them and have them see my daughter or my son, because they may not have met them and have just heard from their own child. It's possible that that mother that you mentioned just now heard from her own child how different this child is, and so she became very upset, and her intention may be a maternal good instinct. She doesn't want her child to be in any way affected, and she wants her child to, as people say, you know, be hardened and get forward, move forward in this society, which is dog eat dogs kind of society, and she wants nothing to impair that. And perhaps meeting the other parent, the child, gives a face to that child and may help her see that the child has got a lot of strength as well. As I've said earlier, when we discussed this, teachers play a big role. And if you've got a supportive teacher who can then call a professional in or themselves do it and talk to the whole class, I think you can diffuse the situation. Teachers, of course, I think should also be strong. If one parent is being bullied and trying to victimize other children, I don't think they should give in. I had a situation recently in an international school where the father finally said, you know, he's quite influential in the VIP. If you do not remove this child from my child's class, I'm leaving the school. Like somehow, you know, they're really important. So the school said, leave lah, you know, if you need to do so. And that was very good of the school to do so. But not every school would do that. Maybe they support the school financially or bring status to the school. They might do the opposite. As I said, we need to have storytelling. And the most important story is the children who are not disabled talking about their disabled, children with disabled friends who have benefited their lives. And that, and of course, campaigns. Right now, I'm working with 4 other colleagues. One who was mentioned earlier, Yunwo, who is a UNESCAP, former UNESCAP person, to work on a national campaign for inclusion. We're trying to get stories like these come out. We're actually asking people to write stories. We're having sort of a competition, and then we want to share this in social media and elsewhere to try and generate this kind of stories to tell. Media's responsibility, and of course, I suspect that high-profile individuals are quite influential. If you are a person who is a singer or a movie star or a person who is in the limelight, you know, people follow you and listen to you, and you have an opportunity to change minds. And we're also going to target people like this locally, internationally in our campaign. Yep. I hope that gives some ideas, but I think the individual parent mustn't give up. I talk to other parents. I watched the journey that Sheila, who was a parent, Shaila was a parent, did, and she often talked to me about the struggles, and I gave ideas, and she met other parents, and she as a teacher, a special ed teacher herself, had so much difficulty in inclusion, but she won the battle by constantly working with the teachers in HM and winning over the other children as well, and parents.
So it all goes back to advocacy, parents' advocacy,
yep,
together within this journey, right? Yeah. Thanks, Dr. Amar. And before we end this episode, Dr. Amar, I think you do have a little bonus for us.
Yes, I have a bonus, and I've been trying to get this message across for most of my life.
Yeah.
I learned this from lots of people, including somebody called Ivan Illich, who I believe is the greatest social thinker for our generation, but almost nobody knows about him. He wrote a book called Deschooling Society, How to Actually Transform Our Education System. But also a guy called Henri Nouwen, who taught me the meaning of life and education. And I'd like to share some thoughts, just very simple thoughts, meaning of education. This is not education, this picture. And for those who are not going to be seeing pictures, this picture showing the teacher modifying the thoughts of children and making them square. Of course, the picture is a little bit bad. If I were to redraw the picture, every child's thinking circle will be different. Some are stars, some are circles, because every of us are so different. And I've heard this from educationalists in Malaysia, professors in university even, that our role is to mold the child to become like the rest of society. No, that's not our education role. But this quite often is the perception. I think many people want photocopies, children who are photocopies of the system. So let me use two words. The first, the word school. The word school comes from the Latin word scola, which means free time. Can you imagine that? That school means free time. None of us can conceive of school as free time, because school is extremely busy time, not to mention tuition and homework and all the stuff. And of course, there may be other things like ballet and piano. The reason school was free time is because in the past, people did not go to school. And whenever you wanted to find out the meaning in life, you took time off from your work and you went to school. You found a sifu, a master, and you sat at his feet. You were free from all the burdens of life, and you could reflect. And the master would say, what do you think the meaning of life is? And you would talk for 2 days about this. And you walked about and you spoke to one or two other people, and then you developed inspiration after many weeks, and then you went back to home and you were different, and you went back to work and you were very different because you discovered the meaning and the truth in life. That's what school was meant. School was to discover meaning, to learn. And look, I love this picture, although it's not a great graphic quality, but it shows children self-learning, which is what school is all about actually. And what Finland does a lot, it encourages self-learning. The second word I'd like to bring is this powerful word, education. Education comes from two Latin words, educer, to bring out treasure within. And so education is not a race. It's not a means to an end. It is the growth and flourishing of a person. Everybody is an unblossomed flower right now, bud. And everybody looks quite different. We don't know what they're going to look like when they blossom. And our role as the teacher and as a parent, as educators, is to blossom this. And somebody is going to be a hibiscus mutabilis, which is a double-petaled hibiscus. Somebody else is going to be a phenomenal rose or an orchid beyond measure. We don't know what they're going to be like, but our role is to actually facilitate that blossoming. And that's going to bless society, going to enrich society, going to create greater diversity. By the way, the word university also means that. Unity in diversity, to bring people of diverse opinions together and allow them to share the different opinions and maintain that diversity, but yet, be blessed from each other. Another good word that I maybe should put here at one point. So this is education in school. We've gone very far away from it. We've gone to photocopy, cooker cutting, factory-based, cookie cutting, factory-based kind of a system which we need to break free from. And Finland, I always quote Finland because they've got some of the best examples. School only 4 hours, you come there, no curriculum, teacher just support you, you learn what you want. And they got Nobel Prize, many. So obviously they're doing the right thing. This is a graphic from a 4.5-year-old child who has got limited speech and some social impairment, didn't qualify to be labeled as autism, very bright. And the teacher had asked him, please draw the animal you want to be. And he drew this wonderful graphic at 4.5 years old. I don't think I could draw it even today with that kind of color scheme and that kind of beauty of a horse racing like that. So I love this Incheon's label, which comes from Incheon Disability Movement, Make the Right Real International Movement. And that's going to be our campaign slogan, by the way, Make the Right Real. We know what we want to do. Let's make it real. Let's not talk anymore about the things that we should do. Let's make it happen on the ground. So something I wrote recently I can share with you. It's important that we keep our hearts always focused on the child's needs, not on the needs of the organization or the system. And that's critical. It's the child's needs that are paramount. Inclusion is not about exam success of the few, but acceptance of diversity as social wealth. And that's how we should look at it. Investment in our country for tomorrow. I like to acknowledge my trainers. I've always been a learner. I still am a learner at 60 plus. Children constantly teach me and their parents teach me. I've been transformed by them. And here's a child who's got a disability, who's not well accepted in inclusion. Even his parents are struggling with him, but he's phenomenal. He's taught me a lot. And over the years in relating to him, he has helped me become a better doctor and a better person as a whole. And I think let's allow disability to people with disability to transform us, not needing to fix them, but allowing them to be who they are while we encourage their full potential so that we can blossom them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Amar. And thank you, Sien, for joining us today.
Thank you, Alexa. Thank you, Dr. Amar.